Thank you very much for coming to this event to celebrate Benjamin Bratton's 2 new books. My name is Ed Keller. I direct the Center for Transformative Media here at the New School. We are one of the hosts, along with e-flux and MIT Press, of the event tonight. I'm going to hand over the introduction immediately to the e-flux folks, and then to Ben, who's going to do a talk. Then we'll have a panel after Ben's talk. But just wanted to say 1 or 2 things about CTM. We're a think do tank at the New School. Been running for about 4 years under our current operational program. We host events like this, conferences, running the gamut from Hacking Feminism to the Signal Path. We also run external collaborations with a range of entities. Past couple of years, Miami New World Symphony, a number of guitar companies. And internal to the New School, we run a number of collaborations across divisions with Manus School of Music and between Parsons, various departments, School of Design Strategies, AMT, and so forth. We also have a really rich relationship with Punctum Books and Punctum Records right now. So we're operating in a range of, different kinds of disciplines, and maybe back up just a little bit. And in general, the goal is to find ways to unify a range of speculative approaches with extremely pragmatic approaches. I also just want to say personally that it's an incredible pleasure to be able to host this event, co-host this event, because Ben and I have been close friends for many years, and the work is incredibly exciting, and also has been a tremendous inspiration for all of us, myself and all of us. So thanks, Ben, for doing this.
I'm not Ben. I'm Brian. It's a really big pleasure to introduce Ben on the occasion of the New York launch of Dispute Plan to Prevent Further Luxury Constitution, the beautifully named book of theory fiction that we published at e-flux together with Sternberg Press late last year. It's wonderful to have this book presented alongside, I think, probably the most anticipated book of 2013, 2014, and 2015, at least in my circles, which is Ben's book, The Stack. So I think, Dispute Plan presents a very interesting side of kind of like the more heretical, mischievous side of Ben's thinking and his writing, and I would recommend checking him out. Just to briefly present Ben himself, Benjamin H. Bratton, his work spans political philosophy, computer science, art, and design. He is professor of visual arts at the University of California, San Diego. He is also professor of digital design at the European Graduate School in Saas Fee, Switzerland, and visiting professor at SciArc, the Southern California Institute of Architecture in Los Angeles. His current book and possibly forthcoming books are on theory and design in the age of machine intelligence. You can see his website at bratton.info. Huge thanks to Ed Keller and CTM for hosting us today, and let's give a warm round of applause to Benjamin Bratton.
Well, thank you very much for both of those very kind intros. It's a real pleasure to be here finally, as Brian mentioned, this book, particularly The Stack, but it's been a long time coming in its gestation, but actually Dispute Plan actually was even longer, which we'll talk a little bit about here as well. So first, my thanks to Ed Keller and CTM, Parsons and New School, for hosting this event. My thanks to e-flux for the sponsorship and co-hosting, and MIT Press as well. And just to get some of these formalities well acknowledged, a few other people who aren't here that should be thanked as well. Doug Seri, my editor at MIT, Roger Friedland, with whom I worked on an earlier version of the Stack book, Jeff Kipnis, who's been a long-time supporter of this, and also a few people who read the early versions of the manuscript and offered kind comments on it. Keller Easterling, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, Bruce Sterling, Kim Stanley Robinson, Natalie Jermenjenko in particular. And so, could go on and on. But and lastly then to Metahaven, Daniel van der Velden Krook for the cover for the book. It was a rather difficult process to convince MIT Press, who has such amazing designers, to go outside their stable and to let someone else develop the cover for it. I'm very glad that we did. And my thanks also to my family, Bruno and Lucian. I want to, what I'd like to do is to go through a little bit of sections of both of these books. So there's ways in which, on a certain perspective, they might be seen as really different kinds of books, and in certain ways they are, and in other ways, the interest and preoccupations of both of them is actually much more tightly interwoven than it might first appear, and that's kind of what I'd like to explore a little bit tonight with this. And so I want to start with one of the pieces, the first piece actually, from Dispute Plan to Prevent Future Luxury Constitution, which is a book that mingles and mangles, I guess, fact and fiction in a very particular sort of way. It was, as I mentioned, originally conceived as a straight theory book quite some time ago, and it was only after a conversation with Julieta that I sort of figured out finally what kind of book it was supposed to be. It's a book about, in essence, terrorism and architecture, about simulation and dissimulation, about how it is that cities are asked to be both the first line of defense against a perceived future attack, and in answering this question, visit a greater violence upon us, the social that defense is perhaps intended to prevent in the first place. And so the texts, in a way, work, I think, at the level of this economy of simulation and dissimulation. Each of them has a somewhat different authorial voice in a relation to this process of doubling and mimesis, of speculation and fiction. In other words, it's really about camouflage. And so some texts may be predator, others are prey, and as they move together, hopefully something is built with it. So I'll begin then with the first piece of the book, which is a sort of very short, a kind of overture of sorts to the others, but also I think you'll probably see perhaps by the end of this where it bleeds into both the stack and the work that's coming next. Many of you are familiar, I should think, with the Sanji Pod City near New Taipei City in Taiwan. This future city was late for its own birth, which was in 1978. Originally planned as a vacation resort for U.S. soldiers, the project was doomed by a series of mysterious car accidents and abandoned in 1980. The future lasted only 2 years. However, when demolition work began in 2008, it was discovered that not one but 5 species of orchid mantis, as yet unknown to science, had overtaken the ruins and multiplied to a population of an estimated 10 million insect inhabitants. Above ground, underground, inside the structures, in between them, no one knows how or why. Entomologists observed that the unintended orchid mantis civilization has developed an incredibly complex division of labor, not only within the same species, but between different species as well. These include systems for food capture, nest construction, and stigmergic communication between individuals and groups that have never been observed anywhere before. The appearance of the mantis has coincided with the proliferation as well of a new subspecies of orchid flowers, which the insects resemble and from which they get their name. Now, orchids don't normally grow in this part of Taiwan, but today they thrive in the unusual labyrinthine cold and darkness provided by the mantis's own architecture. The future city, you see, is not for us. The Anthropocene, the reframing of the earth in the image of industrial modernity, will be short-lived, a geopolitical instant more than a slow geologic era. Humans are slowly vanishing even as their aggregate biomass continues to swell. Their cities are not their own. They are building habitats for other forms of life. Humans are the tools wielded by those other forms. We are the robots for future insects. The extraordinary architecture of Shanji, that is the systems built by the orchid mantis on top of and in between the UFO pods, has become in a short 30 years a precious future archaeological resource. It's not a failed future, it's a successful one. It's our future. We are already its present, we who are displaced by the orchid mantis. Now, I want to then turn momentarily to the stack of physically larger book. It's a, as you see outside, a 500-page book without pictures. So, all things being equal, there's other ways of one might weaponize this philosophy that other kinds of interventions may not provide. It's an interdisciplinary book, to say the least, sort of mixing geopolitics, design theory, computer science, and so forth. In the introduction, I talk about the book as a design brief, a kind of multi-scalar infrastructural design brief. And in this, it seeks to provide a kind of a model of a totality, a whole, something that we're not particularly good at devising anymore. And unlike, I think, some other books that deal with similar topics, it's really, hopefully it's one that's more theoretically rigorous, and also one that is neither really utopian or dystopian in its bent, but a little bit of both. And so what I'm going to do quickly in the next few minutes is try to summarize as much as possible the book. I'm going to talk a bit fast because of that reason. So it's okay if certain things are sort of skipped. What I'm more interested in a way is sort of providing an image of the connections between these things as well. So the two key arguments that really drive the book have to do with this question of planetary scale computation. One argument is that this thing, planetary scale computation, both distorts and deforms the modern Westphalian logics of political geography, and it creates new territories in its own image. And the second key argument is that the different genres of computation, smart grids, cloud platforms, mobile apps, smart cities, Internet of Things, automation, so forth, should be seen not as so many different species out evolving on their own, but as something forming a kind of coherent whole, an accidental megastructure, if you will, called the stack, that is both a computational apparatus and a new governing architecture. We are inside the stack as it is inside us. And so the architecture of this model treats these overlapping layers, their claims, the networks that they inhabit, not as exceptions to some normal rule, but as the basis, in essence, of a new emergent order. And so as examined, it's these 6 interdependent layers: the earth layer, cloud, city, address, interface, and user, which I'll go through quickly. But first, what do I mean exactly by the Westphalian geography and its geometry? Well, the modern nation state is itself a function of a particular kind of cartographic projection that conceives of the earth as a horizontal plane filled with various allotments of land, which individual sovereign unit domains are, by which they are circumscribed into jagged lines. These shapes are derived from a basic topology of loops. And inside each loop of this horizontal segmentation, this base unit of sovereignty, currency, a flag, a World Cup team, and so forth, is provided for this isomorphic unit. Today, loops give way to another topology in geography, not one of that is one of multiple totalities, not one, but multiple totalities layered one on top of the other. With no, I argue, no final last instance sovereignty. But from these multiple totalities, some state-based, some extra state-based, some global, some regional, some modern, some archaic, some claiming the same site or person or bit of data all at once, this new normal appears. Cloud platforms take on the role traditionally assigned to modern states. Modern states themselves rotate and evolve into cloud platforms. And so with regard to the Alec Rosses and Jared Cohens of the world, the geopolitical domain is not, as they say, a chessboard with 196 pieces, one for each country. It is a stack, more like 196 squared, heterogeneous jurisdictions, intermingling, contesting, interweaving in various strange topographies. And so, to the layers themselves. First, the earth layer at the bottom. We take it that as a matter of presumption that computation was discovered at least as much, if not more, than it was invented. It's a process by which the natural world conjugates and calculates its own relations to information complexity and negentropy. And to date, the simple little appliances that we've managed to, we use to wrangle computation are nowhere near, not likely to ever be as sophisticated as those that work around us. And so first, when we talk about a planetary scale computation, we assume that we have to at first admit that the ones that we're composing is in relationship to another that precedes it. The earth layer of the stack is also where the minerals and the energy and all that would power all the other layers above comes from. It's built not just of silicon, but of other conflict minerals, pulled from mountain streams, often from in Central Africa and other places. That is, the stack terraforms its host planet by drinking and vomiting up its elemental juices, spitting up mobile phones. The shiny surfaces of our handset demand gore to feed the gloss of its face. There is another point I make in there is that perhaps nothing has complicated and confused the way we think about the physicality of computation so much as the presumption that there's some natural homology between the digital and the virtual, and the analog and the physical. Digitality is just as physical, just as hungry, just as heavy as any other analog structured machine. The data center industry passed the airline industry many years ago in its total carbon footprint. The question is, in certain ways, is in the development of further ubiquity of information technology, it would allow for a much more efficient network of electrons by which the energy that we do manage to pull and the kinds of calculations that it provides for us can be network routed in such a way that would be more sustainable, or is in the building of the stack itself the thing that becomes, in a way, our final machine? Can we build the stack fast enough to save us from the costs of building the stack? And the contradiction of this kind of Orwell's snake eating its own tail situation was made very clear to me a few years ago. I was on a panel with a guy named Stanley Williams, who's a chip architect at HP, and he was talking about a panel that he was asked to be on by then Vice President Al Gore. And the panel's job was try to design a computer. What would it take to design a computer that could model the entire Earth's climate in real time? Could you draw out the architecture for this such a computer? So one, they figured out that it's theoretically possible to do. It would require what amounts to zettabyte computation, which is a few orders of magnitude faster than what we can manage now. But it would also be roughly the size of Paris, and it would be itself the single most energy-intensive anthropogenic energy event that it itself would be modeling. This is the integral accident of the earth layer of the stack. Okay, to the cloud. For one, the cloud is not placeless. It has a geography, however weird that might be. The platforms of the cloud layer are structured by dense, plural, non-contiguous geographies, a hybrid of USA superjurisdiction and the charter cities that would carve new, partially privatized polities from the whole cloth of these sovereign lands. And so it's not a matter of borders somehow vanishing under the weight of virtual geographies. What we have is not fewer borders, it's an exponential multiplication of borders, interwoven and cross-projected on top of one another. The larger geographical dramas, as I've seen of this, is seen perhaps most explicitly in the ongoing Sino-Google conflicts of 2008 to the present. China hacking Google, Google pulling out of China, the NSA hacking China, the NSA hacking Google, Google ghostwriting books for the State Department, Google wordlessly circumventing the last instances of state oversight altogether, not by transgressing them, but by absorbing them into its service offering. And meanwhile, Chinese router firmware bides its time. anecdotally, this conflict was one of the things I worked with in the book was the Schnitt's notion of the nomos. This quote sort of brings it was useful for me this way. Fan Bingjing was one of the chief architects of the Great Firewall of China, and my students found this quote from me where he's talking about, he's lamenting the fact that Google can still function in China regardless of their attempts to prevent it. He compares it this way. He says, it's like the relationship between a riverbed and water. Water has no nationality, but riverbeds are sovereign territories. We cannot allow polluted water from other nation states to enter our country. And so between the hackers of the People's Liberation Army and Google, there's more than, I think, a standoff between two proxy state apparatuses, two geometries of territory. There are two logics of governance itself, two geographies of governance fighting it out. One, a subdivision of the horizontal and state, one, a stacking of vertical layers. One a state, one a parastate. One superimposed on top of the other at any point on the map, never resolving into a consensual cosmopolitanism. To the city layer. Some designers, may call them architects, may see software as something that is added on to space. They see it, and so they see the idea of smart cities as itself stupid because that assumes the cities are not already intelligent, and of course they're right. Other designers, programmers, may see cities as modules of hardware that fit together one at a time into a larger integrated megastructural matrix. And they too are right. And so one mode of design is inevitably nested inside the other. And in that nest, Homo sapiens comes equipped with an extraordinary array of sensory faculties, which may be augmented further by other synthetic layers in various ratios, ranging from the sensors and trackers in our phones that we carry about like mules, to more intimate media of artificial images and sounds. Situating ourselves in this expanded field, we are both sensors and sensed. On the one hand, we are a primary sapient actor in this drama, supervising an orchestra of sensing technologies, each individually capable of functional processing, and together certain forms of intelligence emerge. On the other, we're not only the subject of this scenario, we are also its subject matter. That wider urban landscape of synthetic sensory systems is not only a platform through which we extend and extrapolate our capacities for abstraction, it is also capable of forms of abstraction on its own. And cities defined this way, with perspectives mixed, I suppose, from public health planning to supply chain logistics, are infrastructure for living and non-living matter to consume itself, and for some forms of matter to achieve and hone sentient intelligence, and to remake cities in their image. In short, we should imagine an AI urbanism a bit like Jacob van Ooskel's stroll through the field, populated by intermingling but mutually oblivious little life worlds, and or in terms of Deleuze's parable of the tick, the latter laying in wait for some threshold event to come its way, at which point it triggers its program response at and into its own little void. Many of our urban sensors and the limited forms of AI work similarly and with similar nobility. More versatile synthetic intelligences occupy more complex Umwelt. Some are predator, some are prey, some are in motion, some are flowering, some are pollinating. And as we stroll among them, we may be registered by them or we may be ignored. We may be a primary cause of concern, or we may be a passing interference in an evolutionary dynamic in which we are neither protagonist nor target. And through this nesting, the city layer is then also home for this urban scale AI, this commingling of diverse sensors. It draws a landscape of sensing and thinking little species, all embodied discreetly or commingling with one another in various pluralities. That is, the AI city may be embodying itself, but not as we do. It's not just the AI in the city, but nested AI co-embodied as the city, with very different kinds of organism to population, to genome, to niche, to signal morphologies at work than the ones with which we're familiar. And so the work of abstraction for urbanism is not only to deploy abstract forms, but to set in motion mechanisms and programs that are capable of their own feats of abstraction, and to calibrate how they would abstract us and one another accordingly. But this is not, of course, how AI is conceived, especially in popular culture. It is understood instead in terms of an anthropic projection, and this, I suggest, is actually very unhelpful. Consider, for example, the Turing test. Turing proposed, as you know, as his test as a variation on the popular parlor game in which two hidden contestants, a woman, player A, and a man, player B, try to convince a third that he or she is a woman by their written responses to leading questions. To win, one of the players must convincingly be who they really are, whereas the other must try to pass as another gender. As we know, the mathematician himself also had to pass, in his case as a straight man in a society that criminalized homosexuality. Upon discovering that he was not what he appeared to be, he was forced to undergo horrific medical treatments known as chemical castration, and ultimately the physical and emotional pain was too great and he committed suicide. The episode was, as we know, a grotesque tribute to a man whose recent contribution to defeating Hitler's military was still a state secret. Turing was only recently given a posthumous pardon, but tens of thousands of other British men sentenced under the same laws still have not. And one notes the sour, ironic correspondence between asking an AI to pass the test in order to qualify as intelligent, to pass as a human intelligence, with Turing's own need to hide his homosexuality and to pass as a straight man. The demands of both bluffs are both unnecessary and profoundly unfair. As for all passing, the performance success or failure reveals far more about the audience than about the performer. Should complex AI arrive, it will not be human-like unless we insist that it pretend to be so, because one assumes the idea that intelligence can be both real and inhuman at the same time is somehow morally or psychologically intolerable. Instead of nurturing this bigotry, we would do better to allow that in our universe, thinking is a much more diverse, even alien, than our own particular case. The real philosophical lessons, that is, of AI, will have less to do with humans teaching machines how to think than with machines teaching humans a fuller and truer range of what thinking can be. It's better then to examine our own, how the identification, the process of identification works, from our own side of the equation, the conversation, trying to get this to start. It's clearly much easier, for example, to make a robot that a human believes to have emotions, and for which in turn a human has emotions in response, positive or negative, than it is to make a robot that actually has those emotions. This is what in AI research is called emotional infill. The human may feel love or hate or comfort from the AI, but he or she is not reading cues, or is reading cues, not detecting feelings. What seems like empathy is really a one-way projection mistaken for recognition, like the Turing test itself, and not based on any real mutual solidarity. In other fictions, policing the imitation game is a matter of life and death, and the plot of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, based of course on Philip K. Dick's 1968 novel, Grand Regime of Electric Sheep, hinges on the Voigt-Kampff empathy test, which differentiates humans from replicants. Replicants in the story are throttled in two specific ways. They expire after just a few years, and two, they have ostensibly a very diminished capacity for empathy. Deckard, the Harrison Ford character, must retire a group of rogue replicants, but first he must find them, and in this world, Turing test thresholds are weaponized, lest replicants pass as humans and trespass beyond their station. By the film's conclusion, Deckard, who himself may or may not be a replicant, develops empathy for the replicant's desire for, quote, more life, and arguably they too, at least the Roy Batty, Rutger Hauer character, seem to have empathy for Deckard's own dilemma. His dilemma, and ours, is that in order to enforce the gap between the human and the AI, defined by empathy or lack thereof, Deckard must suppress the empathy that supposedly makes him uniquely human. In order for the gap to be policed, it must be, in fact, violated. To the address layer. Swirling just closer to the top of the image, we see that any instance, this image of the stack, we see that any instance, singular or plural, of matter, particle or wave, is potentially identifiable by massive universal addressing systems, in which a mapping and linking tool is brought together and for which an Avogadro's number of potential addresses is allotted to every user. The global credential of the address subdivides this heterogeneous territory, both hard and soft, Hertzian space and carbon space, into a discontiguous communicative array, an atmospheric metropolis built of digit strings. Because for something to appear to the stack, to have an existence within the whole, it must be addressed. Its position is made as such. It's an addressing problem, it's a set theory problem, it's an identification, in its identification at once. Now, we were sort of, as I mentioned, this Avogadro's number as well. Show a couple projects here. One of the recently, we did actually a few years ago, sort of thinking about what's the IPv6, which is the next, the addressing system after IPv4. They've all been allocated to the regional RERs or something. IPv6 is a 128-bit address string. IPv4, which most of the internet has been running on since we all been using the internet, is a 16-bit address space. Works out to about 4 billion total addresses, which in a Internet of Things world doesn't really work. It's less than one per person. IPv6, 128-bit address space. You do the back of napkin calculation. It works out to about 10 to the 23 addresses per person. So if you wanted to, if you're perversely motivated, you wanted to assign an IP address to every single thing you ever came in contact with over your entire life, you would never likely exhaust 10 to the 23 addresses. If you're trying to address relations between things, never the more so. So we were interested in trying to get a sense of the granularity of this as well. And so we wrote with this scanning electron lithography beam and a microscope. We wrote what we think is still the world's smallest IPv6 address. Just says like, could you actually, okay, you can address individual cells, but could you write it actually on something? Do we have a pen with a point small enough that you could actually write the address on this as well? Perhaps. This is this is about 10 micrometers across, which is about the size of a red blood cell. But each of the lines is about 50 nanometers in thickness as well. But this is still much too blunt for any kind of practical nanomedicine, so we've got to find a smaller pencil. Okay, to the interface layer. An interface in the book is defined as any threshold point or point of distinction between two complex systems, which also governs the condition of exchange between those systems. So, interfaces can be borders; they can be any kind of any sort of mechanism that provides this. The dominant mode of the interface with which we work, of course, in our society is the GUI, the graphical user interface, buttons with words on them. And as we learn to be accommodated to this accidental megastructure, we become, in a way, a species of button pushers. It's how we interact with the stack and it with us. And the reason for this reductiveness is not so mysterious. All of the things that one user might do with the rest of the stack is so incomprehensibly complex. The possibilities of what might happen is beyond any kind of planning or comprehension. And so all of those things must be, in essence, summarized into synthetic diagrammatic images that tell us what's there and what it means, what we might do with it. And in that synthetic reduction, a kind of what we call an interfacial regime comes into play that would organize the possibility of cognition and action according to its own internal consistency. And as they multiply together, these assemblages, they assemble into those regimes, those diagrammatic total images of the whole that structure what the platform is possible for the user to do, and so forth. Now, we've been doing a lot more work recently in my lab. I think a lot of people have with VR and AR and mixed reality, and it was very exciting. But at the same time, I ultimately fear that not just advertising as being sort of the killer app of this. Everywhere you look, you've got ads for everything. But a more secular danger is also imminent in AR, and that its killer app may prove not just marketing, but also fundamentalist religion. In that AR promises this augmented reality, the design of a kind of differential sacrality, whereby the black versus white political segmentation of the world into friend versus enemy, ours and theirs, clean and unclean, cooked and uncooked, becomes not just a sort of an allegorical and metaphorical reference point, it's directly, literally annotated onto the life world itself. A subtitling of the world according to these differentiations, empire and rebel forces, orc and not orc, so forth. But it's not necessarily the only path. There are also forms of empathetic cinematic co-experience that we can scarcely imagine, allowing for co-embodied users across multiple locations, the induction and deduction of far more complex information flows, and potentially our capacity to intervene on them more directly. Another thing we've been working on recently, we're launching this next Saturday, is a tool that's was a company called Nano VR that I've been working with. It's a VR-based nano engineering design platform. We bring in these what we is the sort of state-of-the-art atomic imaging from SRI. The geometry is brought into VR. You can sort of see the complex molecular structures in here, and then grab and move individual atoms within this, and then simulate how they would behave. A kind of general-purpose nano engineering tool based on, again, what was the most accurate of the molecular imaging structures. You can see the proteins, the molecules, simulate the interactions and stuff. We developed it in La Jolla with SRI, Molecular Graphics Laboratory, and it potentially would help advance any kind of visualization, comprehension of the complex interactions at chemical scale. But it's useful for anybody who wants to learn more about this. And when you boot up the app, you get some of the default ones come with it. There's HIV virus, Zika, a few other things. We've been thinking about much. Is this a good? Do we want 11-year-olds moving from Minecraft to modeling a Zika virus, better versions of Zika
Hell yeah.
viruses? Hell yes. Thus, the script kiddie extinction event is is nigh.
Yeah.
Like this. Yeah. Okay. Lastly, to the user layer. Please don't crash. Okay. Part of the argument that I make in this is that we require a redefinition of not only what it is that political subject relationships to the status within the stack, but a redefinition of the operations of the user as such as a political subject. Because what's going on, not only what's emerging, but what we're already having to deal with is much weirder than our current vocabulary would normally allow us to deal with. The user, I argue, is an open position. The generic universality of platforms makes that position formally open to all users, human and non-human alike. If the user's actions are interoperable with the protocols of the platform, then in principle it can communicate with its systems and its economies. In this way, platforms generate user identities, sometimes whether they're desired or not. But at the same time, the things and people and places and things, animals, vegetables, minerals, can interact with this platform in ways that other institutional logics wouldn't allow for. Platforms don't care if you're an illegal immigrant or if the market sees you as an externality. And so to develop a political and economic design model of the stack, the recalibration of the philosophical and technological boundaries of the human as a kind of user, and if the user is something that is not necessarily human, is pressing. Because, as I say, it doesn't care who or what you are. For example, in security speak, a user is credentialized generally by three qualifications. Something you know, like a password, something you like, something you are, like a fingerprint, or something you have, like a key card. So if something can be, have, and know, it can be a user. Trading algorithm, a driverless car, sandpaper arrivé, a chemical reaction triggering a threshold event in an environmental sensor embedded in a leaf in a rainforest, all users. And so while this stage is perhaps a kind of death of the user in one sense, the eclipse of a certain resolute humanism, it does so because they also brings with it a multiplication and proliferation of other kinds of non-human or inhuman or exohuman users, including sensors and financial algorithms and robots from nanometric to landscape scale. Any combination of which we can enter into as a sort of temporary, for various durations, relationship as a composite user. And it's this dealing with this shift, this sort of moving of the human from this sort of central agency, this position of central agency, to one in which the platforms with which we increasingly interoperate sees us as a particular part of a composite user situation, undermines in ways very directly the primacy and self-reflection of this agency. And we expect pushback as fervent as it is irrational. There are some affinities with technologies, however fictitious or bizarre, that are thought to embody the essence of some creationist order. One of these is food, especially on the left, or the personal human mastery in some way or another, such as the car or the gun. And in time, based on some conversations I've had with former students of mine that now work at Google X Lab, working on some of the driverless cars projects up there and some of the strange feedback they received, let's say. One would not at all be surprised if there's a movement in time to identify human-driven automobiles as a type of arms, and that the Second Amendment to the Constitution, now used to shield gun owners from obvious liabilities and to protect their own sense of personal dominion, will be flown to keep human beings behind steering wheels. That is, your life may be ended by someone encased in a 2-ton steel box careening down the asphalt vista trying to prove a point about how technology will never capture his natural humanity. Okay, I want to then quickly touch and wrap up on AI as a kind of user and as a site of a disembodied symbolic process. Not as a site of disembodied symbolic processing, rather as a nexus of a quite physically embedded system of synthetic sensing. In addition to the demystification and expansion of thinking and relocation of human sapience within this expanded field that I discussed in terms of AI before, also the sensory media of synthetic intelligence may, in time, I see, undermine more comfortable Kantian distinctions between thinking and sensing in the first place. Vision has evolved independently many times throughout evolutionary history, and arguably in the past 2 decades it's evolved again, this time not for cuttlefish or rattlesnakes, but for networked CCD sensors and algorithmic armatures processing what is sensed into differentiated and motivated recognition. Visual sensors responding to light, often but not always shaped like cameras, are one kind of design surface capable of synthetic sensation and computational interpretation. But in the wider urban landscape, they commingle with networks of other surficial sensors responding to motion and pressure and heat and ambient air qualities. And to the extent that it's epistemologically or functionally convenient, we call these variously machine vision or machine hearing or machine skin, but obviously any correspondence to the mammalian sensory system is at best allegorical. Which brings us, of course, to Google's Deep Dream, which is a remarkable project in a lot of different ways. The most interesting aspect of this, I suppose, is less about the incredible, just the amazing images that it produces by itself, but the challenge of a way of seeing as it sees, the way in which this becomes a trace or an artifact of a particular way of seeing that's now, in a very painterly way, available to us for a certain kind of limited, obviously empathetic projection. And to try to see how it sees and to think how it sees. Not necessarily to hallucinate dog faces and everything, but perhaps. Now, if Deep Dream's images are in a way artifacts of the computer's hallucinations and phantom conclusions, dog faces, then the conspiratorial figure cut by evil Google's stepfather is the same paranoid vision turned inside out and back on itself. Perhaps Google the AI is as paranoid in how it sees us as some of us are in how we see it. It's not coincidental or surprising then that as AI matures, its own pattern recognition faculties would reach the plateau of a creative apophenia. And now, that said, as I say, it's not as though Google's algorithms are not themselves paranoid. After all, they see psychedelic dog faces in everything. Now, the reason that Deep Dream hallucinates dogs is itself not spooky. The object recognition faculties are trained using ImageNet data set, which is based on breeds of dogs. It will therefore hallucinate dogs where there are none and identify people as dogs if it's told to look at them hard enough. The latter may seem insulting, but of course it shouldn't. Recall Diogenes' proto-cosmopolitanism is based on the glorious dog-like community of us all. And so, is machine vision paranoid? Is our popular understanding of machine vision paranoid? What is Google up to? Are they watching you? And if so, who or what are they seeing? If our understanding of Google's paranoid machine vision is itself paranoid, making the paranoid AI that much more paranoid in response, then what? Is this how artificial intelligence should evolve in relation to autonomously from human intelligence? If the evolution of human pattern recognition is any indicator, based as it is in both productive and destructive forms of apophenia, pattern recognition, false positive, deception and delusion, then yes and no. So I'm going to conclude, wrap it up to the panel with a quick passage from the Black Stack, which is the last chapter in the Stack book and which was originally published by e-flux. And so it's a nice sort of perfect point of convergence between these two. And then I'm going to introduce the panelists and we'll get to the main event of this. Stacks are made to be remade. They are like an infrastructure predicated on Theseus paradox. Whatever works at any layer is always in the process of being replaced by another technology within the modular whole. And so the design brief of the book is less on the stack that we have than on the stack to come. The Black Stack is this generic figure for those alternative totalities to come that we cannot yet deduce. The stack we have is defined not only by its forms, by its layers and platforms and their interrelations, but also by its content. And as is made painfully clear, leak after leak, that that content is also the contents of our daily communications, now at least partially weaponized against us. But I think there are still more, and I hope to have illustrated more critical design and geopolitics issues that do not have to do with the emergency of shoring up the boundaries of the private human individual, but in the emergence of what forms of composite agency are emerging nevertheless. Copernican traumas that abolish the false centrality and specialness of human thought and species being are priceless accomplishments. The advent of a robust inhuman AI and the geopolitics that would ensue from it, if we were willing to compose it, will provide for similar disenchantments, ones that should enable a more reality-based understanding of ourselves, our situation, and a fuller and more complex understanding of what intelligence is and is not. From there, we can hopefully make our world with a bit greater confidence that our models are good approximations of what's out there, which is always a helpful thing. In other words, the Anthropocene refers not just to the reign of humans, but to the reign of a certain kind of humanism. And to survive it, we must graduate beyond the notion that human experience is A, the central purpose of a world given there for us, and B, something that is separate from our own biotechnical evolutionary emergence, which is, of course, ongoing. And to be clear, my target in this is not humans. Some of my best friends are humans. It's humanism of a certain variety. And unfortunately, that humanist hangover with which we plunder along, to me, ultimately, a folk psychology that weaves fake asceticism, populist solipsism, and various naturalistic fallacies into a political aesthetics, is, to me, a kind of a creationist expression of a mode of global dwelling that sees the world as in a cracked self-image of our own faulty inductions. This humanist exceptionalism, both leftist and rightist, this is the exact recipe of the Anthropocene. And also makes it, at sense of the design brief, far too difficult to see that the geodesign, let's suppose the geoengineering project for what it should be, more like molecular gastronomy at landscape scale. Restored and resorted ecology designed to taste itself in new forms of richly spiced and imaginatively sauced mutual ingestion. But per our more local and specific situation, the status of that humanist subject is perhaps overdetermined, is already sort of overdetermined by its own quantification and verification, including the surveillance and tracing and tracking of the quantified self and the platform user. And so if the panopticon effect is when you don't know if you're being watched or not, and so you behave as if you are, then the inverse panopticon effect is when you know you're being watched but act as if you aren't. This is today's surveillance culture, exhibitionism in bad faith. And the emergence of stack platforms doesn't in any way promise a solution to this, even distinctions between friend and enemy within that optical geopolitics. At some dark day in the future, when considered versus the Google caliphate, the NSA may even come to be seen as the public option. At least it's accountable in principle to some parliamentary limits, they will say, rather merely than stockholder avarice and flimsy user agreements. If we take 9/11 and the rollout of the Patriot Act as the year zero from the US's massive data gathering, encapsulation, and digestion campaign, one that we're now only beginning to comprehend, then we can imagine that the entirety of network communication in this last decade, in this era, the big haul, is a single deep and wide digital simulation of the world, or at least some significant part of it. It's an archive, a library of the real. Its existence as the purloined property of the state, just as a physical fact, is almost occult, almost. The profile of the big whole, from the energy necessary to preserve it to its governing instrumentality, is understood both as a text, a very large text, and as a machine with various utilities, one that overflows the traditional politics of software. Its story is much more Borges than Lawrence Lessig. And its fate is as well. Can it be destroyed? Is it possible to delete this simulation, and is it even desirable to do so? Is there a trash can big enough for the big delete? Even if the plug could be pulled on all future data holes, stopping it immediately, surely there must be a backup somewhere, the identical double of the simulation, such that if we delete one, the other will be forever haunting history until it's rediscovered by future AI archaeologists interested in their own Paleolithic origins. Would we bury it even if we could? Would we need signs around it, like those designed for the Yucca Mountain nuclear waste disposal site, warning off unknowable future excavations? Those of us lucky enough to be alive during this 15, 16-year span would enjoy a certain illegible immortality, curious to whatever metacognitive entity pieces us back together by our online activities, both public and private, proud and furtive, each of us rising back from centuries from now, each of us a little Ozymandias of cat videos and Pornhub. For some dramas, but hopefully not for the fabrication of the stack to come, black or otherwise, a certain resolute humanism and companion figure of humanity would not presume a traditional place at the center of the frame. We must let go of the idea and the demand that any AI arriving at sentience or sapience in whatever form must care deeply about humanity, us specifically, as the subject and object of its knowing and its desire. The real nightmare, worse than the one in which the real nightmare, worse than the one in which the big machine wants to kill you, is the one in which it sees you as irrelevant. Not even as a discrete thing to know. Worse than being seen as the enemy, as in Terminator, or as being the ideal, as in Pinocchio, or Spielberg's AI, same thing, is not being seen at all. As Eliezer Yudkowsky puts it, the AI does not hate you, nor does it love you, but you are made out of atoms that it can use for something else. One of the integral accidents of the stack, perhaps it's the accident that is most productive, may be that anthrocidal trauma that shifts us from the design career as the authors of the Anthropocene to the role of supporting actors in the arrival of the post-Anthropocene. The stack to come may be black because we can't see our own reflection in it. In the last instance, its geopolitics is less eschatological than chemical, because its grounding of time is based less on the promise of historical dialectics than on the rot of isotope decay. It's drawn, I believe, by an inhuman and inhumanist molecular form finding. Precambrian flora changed into peat oil, changed into children's toys. Dinosaurs changed into birds, changed into ceremonial headdresses. Computation itself converted into whatever meta machine comes next, the stack into the stack to come. Thank you. Thanks. So we're going to transition here to the panel. I'm going to make some introductions. I'm going to introduce the panel, and I want to very briefly talk a little about who these people are and what the terms of their invitation, I suppose, are, and then we'll do the awkward chair moving transitional thing here as well. So this order is roughly alphabetic, but not exactly. Julieta Aranda is an artist and editor at e-flux Journal. I first met Julieta at a panel that e-flux hosted in conjunction with the accelerationist aesthetics issue, at which I was paired with Reza Nagaristani, who presenting his Human Centipede piece for the first time, which was a fun and tough act to follow. We hit it off right away, and in the process I told her about the manuscript that was sort of half done, a third done really, if at all, that ended up being the dispute plan book. And in the continuing conversations with her, as I say, finally figured out what kind of book it was supposed to be. Since then, e-flux has published 3 chapters of it, including the robotic surgery piece that people thought was people were very concerned about because they thought were setting children off to be surgeons. It was a fiction. So and so now I'm very happy to count her among my very dearest friends and someone with whom I would give my work complete carte blanche. Also, a pleasure to be at her opening last Sunday night at James Fuentes Gallery, and particularly this work on the questions of post-planetarity will be part of my own writing coming up forward. Ed and Carla, who I'm going to make into a composite user. Ed Keller is director of CTM, as you know, and here at Parsons and New School, co-founder with Carla of AUM Studio. Carla is an architect and writer who teaches everywhere. Has taught everywhere. It's in the Northeast. Carla is at least faculty there in some sort. They are some of my absolute dearest and oldest friends. I met them first at SciArc at reviews, and I met Ed first at reviews at SciArc, Carla at a review at Ed Studio Columbia later that year. And since then, my conversations with them have formed at least the basis for most of the good ideas I can reasonably claim to have had. From architecture to cinema to post-planetarity in its various guises, their friendship has been a primary source of inspiration and proof that genuine communication is possible. Sorry, I went to the wrong one. Come back here. Okay. Right. McKenzie Wark is author of Hacker Manifesto, among other books in Molecular Red. And this, of course, Ken teaches here at New School. Ken was one of the early and first readers of the Stack manuscript in its various versions. I've been reading McKenzie's work since graduate school, and he's really not that much older than I am. He's just more prolific, I think. And his work has really been a signpost figure for me for some time. Originally, at Ed's invitation some years ago here at Parsons, I presented a piece called Surviving the Interface, which later made it into various versions of the city layer and interface layer chapters, with Ken as the respondent, and his generous and insightful comments really made it into the book version of this as well. More recently, his work on geology, chemistry, computation, posthumanism, and so forth has been equally important to me in beginning to think of, especially his work on molecular rifts in the Anthropocene. It's very important for the work to come, especially his defending of that term of the Anthropocene, its instructive connotations, at least from those who would seek to rehumanize it and dilute it, has been an important reference. Matteo Pasquinelli is a philosopher, wrote the book Animal Spirits, edited the anthology Allies of Your Mind, Augmented Intelligence and the Traumas, from which some of his Turing test work appeared. He's also going to be in Karlsruhe, teaching there now. I first met Matteo at an architecture conference in Paris, where, as I recall, over dinner we had some fun at the expense of the various Trotskyists who were also in attendance. Matteo's work shows up in a lot of different parts of the stack, particularly in relation to platform economics. His early work on the value theory of search engines was particularly useful. And more recently, both of our sort of interests tilting towards AI, this very much continues. And last but not in any way least, Lev Manovich is professor at the Graduate Center here in New York at CUNY, and director of the Software Studies Initiative, both at CUNY and still at UCSD. The author of 8 books at least, including most recently Software Takes Command and Language of New Media, probably most well known. Lev is also one of my best friends, by all means. He's also completely throughout the book. It would take another way too long to count all of the different ways. But just very briefly, he's first a co-editor of the Software Studies series, at least officially, in which the book appears, which was itself an outgrowth of a conversation that we had in the early 2000s about what a software studies would entail, which we've both taken on in different ways. He brought me to UCSD and to Cal IT2, where the book was incubated and hatched over the last few years. Language in the media obviously was an important point of development comparison. But more recently, our conversations on data-driven pattern recognition and his work in cultural aesthetics have been extremely influential in my newer work on these questions about epistemology of machine vision. And I could go on in various ways, but just suffice to say, no lab, no stack. So with that, what we'll do is I'm going to get out of the way. The audience, we're going to move chairs up here, and we'll begin with a conversation. I've asked everyone to just say a few words very briefly, 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll open up the conversation, and we'll go as we want, and then we'll do the book thing out there, and we're done. So thank you very much.
Probably want the chairs.
Yeah, we'll need 5.
One more?
We might need 1 or 2 more.
Any more chair?
No, these are both. We have some more up there. I think we might need 1 or 2.
I think there are more chairs.
Sit on the table. This one for you, this one for me. We're not going to fit. I can sit on the edge.
You can sit on my lap.
So, okay. No, Matteo. You're a guest here. Yeah, okay. It's you? No.
Hello.
You sent me an email I didn't respond to.
No worries.
If I
It's
didn't,
that
I'm sorry.
moment. No,
Yeah,
it's okay.
yeah, it's like.
It's because of that group is having the final report.
Yeah.
But I
I
imagine
can't do it.
yeah.
Yeah, but I should have. I'm sorry. I didn't. It's just.
I think that's like a good t-shirt. You know, like you just let me email you respond. I should put on my t-shirt.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
Can we talk? Thank you. Yeah.
How
Done.
was your baby?
How old? Almost 3 months.
So Ed, who's first?
Very small.
Or we start at that end.
I'm last.
Not much sleep. No?
Take it away.
No, I sleep a lot.
Is he alien?
He's alive and he also sleeps.
Hey everyone. So again, just a million thanks to Benjamin for the incredible work. Yeah, we could. So Ben, it seems to me that one of the key and central questions of the stack, and this is for me and maybe for you, and based on how you wrapped up today, I think it is too, is the degree to which what you call sovereignty, the ability to define a state of exception, and operationalize in relationship to that definition. This sovereignty through the stack is now deployed into a fundamentally non-human network of systems, of actors, and of agents, right? And so ultimately these agents will be deeply addressable, and they will share cognitive architectures that are unrecognizable to us. And so in the conversations that we've had severally amongst ourselves, myself and Ben, Carla and myself and Ben, some other conversations I think with Ken over the past few years, this question of deep addressability for me comes to the forefront. And I think that Ben provides an important set of clues toward how we can go beyond the problem of cognitive architecture is unrecognizable to us. And he actually telegraphed the comments I wanted to make today in what he presented. And specifically in talking about the Turing test, he says, quote, that we would wish to define the very existence of AI in relation to its ability to mimic how humans think that humans think will be looked back upon as a weird sort of speciesism. And then he went on to say tonight again that we do better to presume that in our universe thinking is much more diverse, and indeed that humans and machines will learn more from each other, and that machines, quote, teaching humans a fuller and truer range of what thinking can be, and for that matter, what being human can be, might be the kind of near future that we have to look forward to and that we're living through. And I guess I would want to tie that back to the question of massive addressability or deep addressability. We've always been alien, we've always been multiple, and we're only now coming to properly recognize the degree to which that's the case. But the technoscape which Ben cites the stack in instantiates a kind of lens or frame through which we can understand what the consequences would be of all matter speaking simultaneously in a resounding clamor of being, to steal a line from Badiou's regrettable book on Deleuze and repurpose that concept a bit more fittingly. So today our clamor would be characterized by a series of delays and latencies, which do indeed occlude communication between layers and agents. But the extrapolation of the deep address stack argument would be in keeping with a vision of matter and myriad cognitive models that are produced by this system in instantaneous communication with one another. And there's a kind of a profound set of implications there. Ben says on addressability, quote, the promise or threat of designing with a computation that is so deeply laced into the structures and behaviors of matter is an ambition for addressing platforms of comprehensive transparency and the remote interaction with the world at a chemical and atomic scale. The motes falling in space that fascinated Lucretius would be addressable data points and their transit fields a programmable clinamen. So coming to terms with this involves a form of speaking with the alien. For me, something that I could unpack pessimistically via the anabatic and katabatic circuits that Apocalypse Now develops, or to unpack optimistically via the kind of bootstrapping of mind and fate that we find in Lem's and Soderbergh's version of Solaris. So I wonder what the final role of deep address can be in this context, right? Ben says that address is like a valve through which the nomos of the cloud cleaves subdivisions smaller than the geographic, draws landscape-scale calculable interiors. This potential blessing of drift toward alien in communication is along with the very abyssality of deep address itself, a most productive accident of the address layer, one we would do well to explore. So it seems to me that there's an optimism there. It's kind of like the exploration of phase spaces that we hear in some of Manuel de Landa's work. And I wonder, again, what this final role of the deep address could be. Is it the production of new natures, the production of new forms of mind? This is the implication that I hear in the book and that he concluded with tonight. New natures should, I imagine, be thought with a prerequisite acknowledgement that our human definitions of nature are provisional and limited at best. Again, the beautiful line that Ben uses that I always quote is the project of the evacuation of the human diagram. And again, this is all fine until these definitions of nature are assumed to be essential. And so maybe borrowing a bit from Foucault and Spinoza, we could say that any given nature should be defined by the ensemble of systems and organisms that it's dangerous to. And again, I've spoken a little bit recently about Carl Schroeder's notion of thalience, a kind of a science post-science, where the collected points of view or cumulative knowledge that all agents in an ensemble that's perfused by sensing would allow a definition of a new form of natural or a new form of nature. In that context, a single human is nearly galactic to the viruses that live in it, and their point of view combined with ours would yield a composite nature and a composite temporality. So again, to conclude, my take on this is that there's a kind of an ontology via collective intelligence that's produced. Again, it's not, as Ben said, it's not a city for humans. It's not a stack for humans. And maybe this is the implication of the deep addressability. But again, the abyssal dark ecologies that he talks about, they may consume us, or perhaps like Solaris, they may somehow recognize us.
Sam.
Can I go? Okay. Hi. Ben, this is a Magnus Opus, of course, a great book, very complex. So I come to simplify, also to help probably myself, our audience. The big question for me would be how the stack grows. What does it make it grow? How would it transform? But anyway, this is too theoretical. This book reminds me indeed of another crucial book for a generation that was 1,000 Years of Nonlinear History by Manuel de Landa, that actually was written 20 years ago, and actually was also crucial for introducing this geological stratigraphic model into media theory and philosophy. At that time, the model was very simple because it was just 3 layers, so just the inorganic, the organic, and the semiotic, the linguistic. So that's for me an important reference. And the other side, the coincidence is like this book launch is happening at the same time of the Ethereum conference in New York. That is actually probably adding, further layer of complexity to the stack. Also in the attempt to bring computation into legal contract, not just financial derivatives, transforming, the procedures of law into code and vice versa. Something that I cannot describe, other people can do better than me. But both your book and also the Landa's book are books that try a kind of empirical philosophy, a theory of design, in the past. You repeat often in the book, this is a book about design. It's a book about geopolitics, politics, and it's very ambitious, but also a book about design. And also you engage basically with all the authors of political philosophy you find out there. If you look at the reference of the index of the book, is endless. It's basically, covering all the debates happening today. But I like the way this, just to simplify, I keep on simplifying because it helps. I like the way you avoid then to partake in very tried debates of today media philosophy and theory, the way you avoid to celebrate, for instance, abstraction against conflicts of geopolitics, or to defend the primacy of living matter and sensation against computation. You stay there in this kind of imbrication. And indeed, the notion of the stack is a good empirical method to break binaries that we imported easily from Europe, let's say, from European philosophy, from the Greek Christian tradition. It is influencing people like Agamben. Is one of the polemical targets of the book that you you shoot like you shoot the Red Cross today. So it's this continuous fight of the user with the stock, new ideas are generated. One of my favorite in the book is the notion of queer artificial intelligence that maybe one day you will find a way to expand for us. And but there are other things I like. For me, still, working on this simple, very simple imbrication of the concrete and the abstract. I like the way you, following Virilio and Ballard, say that technology, of course, produces new accidents, new type of catastrophe and crisis, new traumas. But also, these new traumas and catastrophe demand design, generate new technology to resolve them or expand them. So I like this, reversal of the old idea of catastrophe and trauma. And indeed, but today there are also technologies designed to generate catastrophe in systemic way within the stack. For instance, the financial markets that are precisely designed to develop this. And at page 357, you're right. In order to build a stack to come, we have to first imagine it in ruins and work backward from this as both a conclusion and a starting point. And I find it very, telling this point. Short quote, but very clear. And again, farther down, page 379, you say, for me, and this is like probably a way I try to grasp some of your incredible intuition here. For me, what is at stake is not philosophy or physics, but the means by which we abstract actual work into intelligence and back again according to ideas of preferred function and outcomes. As the last starting point, the design of the next stack must not define itself by a symbolic or operational position between the virtual and the real, or the soft and the hard, or even the thinking and the unthinking. But in any case, I think that maybe new layers of the stack must be thought, and probably it's like the layer of the address that is like pointing the further level of complexity to the topology of data mining, metadata correlation, machine learning algorithm, that opening up new universes, and this is probably this new economy of machine learning algorithm, the new economy of metadata is something that maybe we should explore. We will explore better in the future. And yeah, I take this book as a great book, a military tractate of today's mediascape. More than, yeah.
Yes. So I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I am going to be quite brief here, is one of the layers of the stack, which is the user layer. And we were recently as in 2 days ago, talking about it. And because for me what becomes interesting is try to place in the building of cities and creating of these spaces that may be accidentally built for mantises or for humans, or for mantises and humans, or for mantises that pass for humans and humans that pass for mantises, and so on. The moment that you see both humans and mantis as users, I do not understand exactly what happens to the civic. And where does the civic, what happens to the civic space and to the sense of responsibility that comes with it. So maybe something that has been quite interesting for me is to try to find a place for it within the stack, or try to dispense with the necessity for it. And maybe that's my own, how would you say, my own persistence in some kind of responsibility at a human level that must be decimated and dispensed with. That's also possible, I don't know, but that's, I guess, where I would zero in my concerns for today. That's pretty brief.
So Benjamin's both books, but in particular the stack, are exactly the kind of things we were hoping to publish when we established Software Studies series at the McKenzie Press in 2008. And I'd like to use a few minutes to explain to you why Ben is the ideal author one would love to have. So this expression, right, which come to us from 1960s, don't trust anybody under 30, I think it's more true than ever. But I think what are other expressions I want to give you is to guide many of you graduate students. Don't trust any media theorists, or don't trust anybody who pretends to be intellectual who doesn't code, right? So people, always talk of Deleuze, but never discuss fine details of D3, JavaScript, R, or Python. Perhaps you maybe want to take another class. And what I want to point out, because it hasn't been said yet, is that the reason Benjamin is able to produce such both deep and such expensive, right, both in terms of the size of the book, but also expensive in the sense of how many different territories he covers, sort of Bible, is because of his very unusual background. Because Ben is one of a few intellectuals for 21st century. So while he basically got his PhD in sociology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Even he was teaching in SciArc, so working with young architects, and architecture is a very interesting way to do research today, like an alternative for writing academic papers. And then later he joined us at the visual art department at UCSD, but in parallel he had this other career, which kind of put him in the forefront of how developing kind of computational civilization. So in the late 90s, he was running the office of the most important company of the 90s, which basically established interactive web design as a new field. It was called Razorfish, right? And then in early 2000, he was also had an important position at the next kind of key company, Imaginary Forces, which is, pioneered the whole field of motion graphics, which have replaced, experimental film. And also Imaginary Forces was kind of creating virtual environments and various kind of designing physical spaces as well. Right? And then while he was teaching architecture and writing his theory, so he was in the forefront of this industrial kind of research. And then in his third kind of position, he was running advanced research group at Microsoft. At Yahoo. But he also kind of did many projects where he was a consultant and he brought architects and programmers together, for example, to design interface for like Microsoft kind of smart home. Right? And finally, he came to UCSD in 2008, where he established a lab at Carla Leitao, where I also used to work at California Institute for Telecommunication Information, where he can collaborate with neuroscientists and nanoscientists and go and print like the longest IP address, right, on a small kind of, on a few atoms. I mean, not something, I don't know any place in New York, never new school, no graduate center where I teach. I don't think there's any place in New York where you can do that, right? Here you basically just, in a kind of intellectual Siberia, all you can do is theorize. So I think, as you can read this opus, right, this magnificent kind of guide, this weaponized kind of hardcover, to use Ben's own language, just think about it, right? And if I can leave you somewhat arrogant advice, for which I'm known for, I mean, if you really want to become like Ben, if you really want to, figure out something important for the next kind of quarter, of the 21st century, I mean, drop out of school, so do a couple of startups, go work for Google, and then come back and then start writing. And then only then, you start producing interesting cultural theory for today.
Yeah, I'm so old. I studied Unix. I was a B minus.
That counts.
Yeah.
Even Fortran counts.
Yeah, I started on Fortran. Sucked. I firstly want to acknowledge how great the writing is. Ben keeps writing these sentences I wish I had written, and I will. Just let me give you the phrase, molecular gastronomy at landscape scale is more than an amuse-bouche. It's a concept. So the writing is awesome. My quibble is that the virtual is not ideal, the virtual is real but not actual. And I think it's actually, to make it material was the whole point, and the thing everybody got wrong. But maybe one could still use the word if that's what one thinks it means. I will ask the token Marxist question, which is who or what is going to own and control it? And the thing to ask would be what. William Gibson already speculated in 1984, what if the ruling class is no longer even remotely human? And that is, I think, the thought to process. And Charlie Stross moved that along. And I think this moves it along a bit too. But I would want to foreground who or what owns and controls it, and is it on autopilot? Could it actually build itself in a different qualitative forms? Is a fundamental question. And finally, the thing about the post-Anthropocene is we're going to be in the Anthropocene for something like 10,000 years. So we really have to think long-term. And humans are really, really bad at that. So maybe to no longer be just humans is really just essential. We just can't be us. We have to get out of that. And then maybe there is just this problem that if the user, and the user doesn't have to be human, but the user-Earth relationship mediated through the stack keeps giving the user, it seems to me, 4 perspectives, of which 3 are dominant, that it's then going to treat Earth as a commodity, something for a strategy, something about exposure, or something for communing, and where that's not even a good word. But maybe the 4th of those, rather than the other 3, is a thing that the stack could do. So could one give it other, like on the one hand, I was just thinking, with my cell phone, I could order one of probably 1 million Amazon products, and I could get one of, several million apps, one of at least 100 Uber cars, and 43 different kinds of pizza, all in the space of about 5 minutes. But the thing is, maybe not how different all those things are, but how they're all like exactly the same. It's exactly the same. The form of the relation is exactly the same, and that's the thing to maybe hold on to. Because isn't that what a concept does? Is says what's the same about all of these things that otherwise appear different. So good concept is slightly true about a lot of things, as opposed to a good fact, which is mostly true about one thing in particular. And the beauty of the book is the way it negotiates the relation between the two. So thank you.
So, amazing book. I'm still going to try to, next 5 years, to try to understand it and explain it to some students and all that. I guess I would like to, since you are interested in governance, in everything you write, I think an important question for me would be to bring, to the black stack, the blank stack, just like to the black swan, there was a blank swan. So is there micro times in the stack to think about this kind of old agents of the, data model prediction or data prediction model? Like, is even the concept of concept something possible, that level of idea of abstraction? Like, or even abstraction as a formulation of concept that then creates a model to then implement in the near future. Just like you had the Internet of Things, you had to create something really small in terms of inserting into material. Will there be a micro time where that bias goes in? So is probability important? Like statistics is done with, but is probability important for the stack, or will it be part of it or not? Because for architects, bringing the architect view, for architects, it's important. Like we still use micro models to advance like little 5 seconds at a time. Not only in our buildings, but to be able to formulate anything. Is it important to forecast? Is it important to use the idea of data mining and fact as a base to create models? Or is what we called speculation so far the only material reality, and that then gets expansive? So expansive with an A, and that's the base of everything. And again, I'm just for reference, I'm going to quote a little bit of the blank swan in relationship to that. So the blank swan by Elia Yasha from 7 years ago. Speculation shall from now on become absolutely non-metaphysical, and by this I mean that it won't even be about the physical world and its laws, and that it won't be concerned with possibilities and expectations anymore. My speculation will be absolute speculation, that is to say, speculation in the sense of financial markets. So can data even be, well, one big discussion right now that we constantly have is this strange problematic where we have such a reliance on data that all decisions are based on data, on fact. At the same time, we do know that we actually use data to create particular, to prove arguments that we want to make to begin with. And so where do we play that game? In the stack, that is a constant analysis, mapping, and formulation platform. And so also Elia Yash in that same book says that the writing process is everything from then on, because it's the thing that fills in the blanks. And so does a stack need that as well. Again, from the discussion that you had in the black stack part. And this is important for me, at least, because of the way in which model is an important character in megastructures and utopias. That's the way in which we establish governance to begin with. And again, you mentioned that in page 304. I would imagine, I knew that I forecasted that we were going to use the 300 pages. And again, thinking that, for instance, the cloud layers of the stack will have things like, where saving in cloud is syncing. It's not saving, it's not archiving, it's syncing, it's to equalize. Again, so it's a model of economy, for instance, of the gift, or of a lot of like other socialist utopias. And these privilege two things. One of the things that the cloud layer does is it extends the bodies. So it's always interested in extending bodies in some way. That's how it is born, it's how it makes its body. And then the other thing is by doing that, it regurgitates new maps. It creates new maps for us to understand where we kind of can navigate information. So there's a lot of things outcoming from that, but I wonder if because we are interested in that discussion of the megastructure, which is different from the agro-objects, and we're interested in the utopia, and we're interested in governance, I wonder if models are still interesting as ideas.
And what now? Ed, I'm looking to you.
I guess I would pick up
Mike.
on the thanks. I guess I would pick up on the microtemporalities question and then link it back to the invocation of 1,000 years of nonlinear history on some level, because, and this is following up actually a conversation that I've had with my post-planetary design seminar students all semester, pretty much, asking the question to what degree the stack as we have it in the stack, the black stack, the stack to come, can handle these different kind of temporal scales. And the instantaneity of a form of communication which matter, reality, haven't really given us yet, at least as far as we know or can work with. We had a conversation with Peter Watts a couple of weeks ago, and partway through we were talking to him about something quite related to this, and he about the thalience idea that Carl Schroeder unpacks. You know, effectively thalience would be a ubiquitously deployed network, computational network, which reports back essentially across the entire network. And Watts's response was to say, well, you know, reality, nature already does that in a way. It's just there's tremendous latency built into the system. And so it seems to me that one of the things that we have to do is we have to look at ways that, not the models, but the evidence that we've been studying for quite some time shows us what the consequences of those latencies and those delays are. In that case, then, maybe I would be looking for a model, and I don't know if it's the right thing to do, I would be looking for a model that would allow me to understand, even if it's at very compressed timescales, what the consequence of a near instantaneity would be. It wouldn't be a timescale that humans could interact with, could participate in a dialogue with. It wouldn't be the city or the stack for the humans, as Ben was saying. It would be for some other set of agents or for itself. But I'm still curious if we can find models based on evidence that we've studied, that example that Delanda has worked with in 1,000 years of nonlinear history, that then can be extrapolated into the context of the stack. It won't be at a human scale. You know, this is where the speaking with the alien question comes up for me, and how we actually start to navigate that territory.
I mean, in mass of temporality, when it comes to speaking to the alien, what I wonder about is like if we cannot even speak to ourselves in terms of looking at the past, right? Like it becomes impossible to read hieroglyphics. It becomes impossible to read ancient Mayan languages. It's when you think about the things that Carl Sagan sent into outer space, he sent LPs. And I'm always imagining alien DJs with headphones, you know, trying to play these things. So, I mean, like we are incredibly bad at our own language, even. So how? I mean, like just like I'm trying to figure out like how can we be so presumptuous as to think that we can speak with some other form of intelligence if we become illegible to ourselves so fast.
So I want to say something about the computer or AI as like an alien, which I think is actually one of the most important issues, right? So the way machine learning, which is the contemporary form of AI, right, is used in the industry and in our society by non-profits, is to classify things into already familiar categories, right? So, for example, Facebook identifies you and says, okay, you're male, 28, Caucasian, and so on. Now, when you start working, right, with computer vision, computational linguistics, et cetera, you realize that it's also easy to kind of have computers produce completely unfamiliar, right, pictures of reality where things are connected, which normally are not connected, right? This kind of surrealist view, the meeting, right, of different things. But the problem is that, so you can say, great, let's use computer, let's use AI in art history, literary theory, film studies, because we can actually look at these historical cultural landscapes in new ways, and that's the promise of digital humanities, right? The problem is that when the computer produces, right, with new categories and new connections, you have no idea if it means something, if it just got a mistake, right, because you maybe didn't program things well, or because you didn't extract features. So that's actually, right? So the challenge over time is that we have this amazing machine which can produce new views of things, right? The machine which is perfect at устранение, estrangement, but it's kind of impossible to recognize, in fact, when it does something interesting.
You know, there's also, but in relationship to that, there's a point that I think Ben made tonight, if I'm remembering. It's either something he wrote in the book, which I was reading earlier today, or it's something he said tonight, which is effectively that all of the artifacts and devices we're surrounding ourselves with are really just a kind of an iteration of an already embedded, more robust computational platform. And this is why I wanted to invoke the idea of the natural versus the created natural. Effectively, you know, this is an argument that I would make if we look at, quote, the natural world that surrounds us and the computational robustness that it already evidences, then the question would be, how can we define meaning in that context, and how can we then understand what the platform that we're building is allowing us to do? I mean, couldn't you say effectively that we live in a very naturally computationally robust environment, which is already multiply layered, it's already a platform, and what we're doing right now, between language and all of the limited technologies and the advanced technologies that we've deployed, is really just exploring the phase space, the potential phase space of computation. We're just doing it using iPads and a global network instead of photosynthesis and a few million years to carry out a set of calculations and then output. So it seems to me that the time question in relationship also to meaning and output is a really, really important question. You know, I remember Ben also doing a talk a few years ago at one of the conferences here. I think it was one of the ones that Trevor organized, Trevor Schultz, and Ben was talking about the long arc of education. It shouldn't be, you know, a 10-year project. Maybe it's the century-long or the 4-century-long arc, and asking the question how instrumentally we can sustain that. I mean, I personally don't see that we have more than another 20 or 40 years. So it's we as humans in any case, and so the long arc is almost like it's slipped out of our grasp at this point. But I think it's a very urgent question, at least to invoke the idea that all of the layers in the stack that were here before us were already operationalized, and they're just running on a time frame and with an input-output cycle that we're not connected to. It's like Julieta, the mantis and the civic space that has collapsed in the example that Ben read the sort of fictional piece about. It seems to me that that's also connected to this, you know, in a very Ballardian sense, that it's not going to be a civic space that anyone can recognize, but there might be an analog to that civic space in the planetary scale stack that was here before us. It's not human. So again, when I say speaking with the human, I don't literally mean it, although I love Solaris as the example because, you know, the planet scales itself down to be able to actually have a communication with a few people, and so there is a kind of I'm contaminated with a lingering, you know, desire to cling to that human diagram, which, you know, we're in the process of evacuating.
It's also that I think discussion usually is very difficult to have with this very kind of general word for artificial intelligence. What we call artificial intelligence is like this huge bag of a lot of very different kinds of intelligences, and they not only have only different agendas, they have different evolutions, and there's also a panoply of biases of what they have. So it's a very strange thing that we continue to just use that word, and we haven't yet created more definition or granularity for what kinds of different intelligences can exist.
Well, I just want to say something because, you know, I used to be colleague of Ben, and we both were teaching. Ben is teaching the Department of Visual Art at the CSD, but now I'm professor in the PhD program in computer science at Graduate Center. So I actually teach computer science students and I don't just use iPads. Actually, we have supercomputer in our lab because we can't really figure out these things on iPads. But what I want to say, like, you know, there's no such thing as artificial intelligence, right? You got to realize that something journalists write about. It was a term introduced in the 50s. It was kind of popular in the 60s. But I have a friend, right? So he's working at the IBM Watson building, this ugly building next to Cooper Union, right? And so I go visit him. It's a Lev. So there's no Watson. IBM just happened to win, right? The competition. So when marketing people said, let's like start talking about Watson, there's just a bunch of people who know statistics, computer science, data mining, the same as everywhere else, right? So there's no such thing as the I, right? just to know, okay?
And maybe this is something for McKenzie. When I'm thinking about these ideas of responsibility in the civic space, and when you were talking now, Ben, you were talking about the interface and the button pusher, and it brought to my mind this being in these cars in Berlin, the cars to go, and so you are encouraged to drive in a more ecological manner. And instead of doing it out of responsibility, there is a sense of reward, because what you get are these trees, and if you break, like if you are a poor driver, basically you kill those trees, and if you are a very good driver, the trees, this like screen with trees, develops birds and flowers and fruits and so on, right? So there is some kind of like sense of reward, but it's not a sense. It's not quite responsibility, right? So I'm trying to figure out like how does that dilute in the relationship between the between the user and the layer, let's say, and the earth layer through this like button interface somehow. That's I think that because of what you were saying, McKenzie, maybe this is something that you can speak to.
I just think how much of a lot of that descends from research that wasn't actually done on humans at all. It was done on primates. Because there's a lot of experiments you couldn't do on humans unless you're Nazis. And the Soviets did it too. We'll never know.
We did.
But it wasn't even based on stuff humans do. It's like, it's like primates do it, so we can get humans to do the same thing. A lot of what on the one hand, it's not AI because it's not intelligence, but then it's also not artificial, right? It's actually it's real electrons and so forth. But on the other side, it wasn't actually for humans in the first place that you built, systems of reward and control. But I just to wind it back even a little further, I'm just struck by how many of the component bits in many things in the stack all really come from World War II, which was kind of like a crash program to like build out a incredibly flexible infrastructure that would defeat the Nazis. It was all done in about 3 years. And it took 40 years to figure out what each of the pieces of that could even possibly ever do. But the thing now is, because Ed's right, we've sort of got 40 years, is how do you do that again? How do you have a crash program that would really only take a few years to design and build a different infrastructure given what we know? Wouldn't that be fun? Wouldn't that be fun? Like, why don't we set our best design schools on that task? That would be kind of awesome. Because how you figure out in a very, very short time frame something that's has impact over a very long one is a problem that's beyond our primate brains, it turns out.
Can I try to maybe bring conversation more directly to the book? Because I'm sure many of you are kind of wondering, right? Oh my God, we all used to have this conversation for years, In the 80s, 90s, 20th century, people wrote these fundamental books, right, like Foucault, right? Writing one Bible after another, and then the 21st century came and they saw blog posts and, and hashtags. So I think Benjamin, right, is like the closest we have, right, in our culture to producing this new kind of monumental volume because of its scale. But I'm also wondering, right, why you guys don't do it, right? Why we don't do it, right? I mean, why is it so hard to produce such a kind of amazing synthesis today? I mean, obvious answer is we know too much, right? So in fact, the stack, the internet, right, is partly the reason why it's hard to do Foucault today, because we're aware of too many things. I mean, the reason Foucault was able to write book after book, I mean, he would go to French library, right, just like spend 2 years, studying prisons or studying, doctors. And that's why, right, his amazing insights are kind of based on a very limited part of knowledge about a particular part of the world. So we can say that, in fact, 20th century theory, the reason it was so kind of beautiful, it was only possible in the Cold War era, when the Western world was kind of separated, and you can just talk about yourself, you didn't know what was going on in other places. And but also I want to say, to bring it to a question of alien, which I think is very important. We had an alien in 20th century. That's why 20th century was infinitely more interesting than this century. We had an alien, right? There was a Cold War. There was the West and the East, right? And the East was really different. And then after 1990, the world is becoming more united, right? 2 million people joined with the Western world. Everybody kind of started to communicate using the same platforms, visit each other, right? Between the telephony basically becoming kind of free, and discount, the kind of cheap new airlines, right? Getting you from place in Europe to another place in Europe with 15 euros, right? The world became very much connected. So the world became like a internet, right? And I just want to say, I know it's just a coincidence, right? So we shouldn't make too much out of it. But of course, it's also very interesting to know that the end of this kind of the end of this world, which had ours, which is the Cold War world, and beginning of a kind of web coincide, right? So 1989, 90 is the end of the Cold War, right? The collapse of Soviet Union, Berlin Wall, and that's exactly when Tim Berners-Lee invents such a stupid, right? Such a stupid kind of HTML system. Nobody wanted to publish it, right? Because computer scientists working on hypertext, like on hyperlinking, since the 60s, it's so stupid, nobody would use it. And that's of course why it took over the world, because it was so simple, right? So kind of this global connectivity, which really, we wouldn't have globalization without internet, right? And somehow the collapse of this old world, which was very dialectical, very interesting, because actually what was the other can happen at the same time. And I think this is maybe the intellectual moment when Benjamin book kind of has been born. Except it took like 35 years to kind of create 600 pages. And those of you, who ever tried to write a book, I have no idea how he did it, right? He really must be an alien. That's the only explanation, right? Sorry guys, you guys are just so serious, everybody. I'm just trying to bring a bit of humor. It was also a good part of 20th century cultural theory, which seems to be lost.
Do you guys think we take one or two?
Of
from
course,
the,
yeah. There's a mic in the house.
Okay, I guess this question is, it's about one's emotional stance in relation to the stack and how you use it, I guess. I guess I'm an architect and technologist, and I work with code and spaces and I teach architecture. And I guess to use a kind of a code-based metaphor, I've read your essays and I haven't finished the book, but so you might address this in the end, but it almost seems like the stance you have in a kind of emotional or kind of intellectually emotional terms is one in which humankind has created like an agent-based flocking simulation, like a very simple one, and then having let it run and also being on one of the humans being on one of the agents have suddenly realized how amazing it is to watch the reverberations of the sky, most other agents not being humans, and the stack is a kind of an attempt to elucidate or to clarify or to have a call to recognition of like, look at these reverberations and how gorgeous they are. Like, look at the emergent effects of what has happened when we try to generate these things. They're actually these accidental formations in the sky that we will call, or you're calling accidental megastructures. I guess my question is, on one hand, this is a very kind of a simple metaphor for your book. On one hand, the flocking behavior seems to be driven by markets or profit primarily. Or humans trying to do things for other humans, or things trying to do things for things that human thinks are good. But from a kind of a design or an action perspective, I guess my question is like, how do you act using this? Is this a model to be used? Is this a mental model to be kind of uploaded to your framework in order to change the world in a different way? Or is the stack a medium itself that we always exist within, and so that our goal or task, the task of people who want to change the things in the world, the stack is a medium to be altered? Or is the stack kind of, are you coming to us almost as kind of an oracle to describe kind of this inevitable totalizing feature that will inevitably happen, and that no matter us, no amount of us kind of struggling or working to change it is going to stop us. Like, this is a kind of a model that has no outside, and so we can't act. And I guess so. My question is, what's your kind of exhortation to those who try to change things in the world, given any sort of medium, while having adopted this?
Ben, do you want to come here to answer, or you want to sit?
There's about 8 questions. I think I lost track of it. So yes. So let me. I think that the two that I think are the most salient, where I think maybe we have a longer discussion afterwards, is to do with this emotional sense of like what almost affective or maybe somewhere between emotional and ethical, perhaps relationship to this, particularly as a designer, which is not necessarily this, which is the same as everyone else might have. There's a level of a certain professional or even intellectual or ethical responsibility to be the one who decides which bricks get stacked on top of which other bricks in what order they go in this. And then there's, I think, a different question that I often get asked in many different, in various ways when I do this stuff, is ultimately like, it comes down to, are you pro-stack or anti-stack? Is this essentially is this a plan that we're to follow, or is this a warning? Because it seems like it goes both ways in different ways, and that's not a bug. That's a feature, I think, of the model. When Matteo had referenced this a bit earlier. There's part of the beginning I talk about the productiveness of the accidents in this. It's like the old Virilio chestnut. Any new technology always produces its own accidents in this way, and I try to sort of loop this around with the basic Socrates admonitions about the essentially pharmacological nature of any technologies, both remedy and poison, that the accident also produces its own technologies, right? And so there's no guarantees on any of this from this law. But I will say one thing, and that is, and perhaps this goes to a different way that we'll have a longer conversation about this with the civic and this one. I think a lot comes down to the capacity, what are the capacities for solidarity and empathy and selflessness that would be provided for, and mutuality. And I think it comes down to, it's easy to be empathetic with things that look like you. It's easy to save creatures that are cuddly. It's empathetic with alien forces. It's actually much more difficult, much more challenging. And I think the civic is a particular spatial instantiation of this. It's based on a particular logic of the state of cohabitation in the same location. We are the people who live on this side of the river. Up them, there it is. And I think it has its own sorts of problems. But these questions of empathy and recognition, especially with some of these other issues, with the talking about alien intelligences and things that are really not like one of us, that nevertheless we are in it together, is where that vocabulary would come from. At the same time, I would say this, is that I think that any politics that might scale from this is not my inclination, and this is not to disqualify any other alternatives. But it would be one in which that we presume that there isn't a necessary homology between means and ends of the relative quality or form by which this would take place. And I mean this, one of the things about platforms that's sometimes counterintuitive in certain ways is that they may certain kinds of platforms may have very egalitarian, democratic, dynamic effects that are non-hierarchical in their outcomes, but they in and of themselves are not them at all. And as I mentioned in the book, urban street grid is a kind of classic example. You could imagine no more inflexible, autocratic, rigid topology that would be superimposed upon a space, and yet it produces this highly idiosyncratic, dynamic, non-hierarchical access to these points in structures in this as well. And I think part of this, and where certain parts of the book may tie in with some of what Nick Charnisak and Alex Williams called the critique of the prefigurative politics, is a presumption that there has to be a way in which that in order to produce a certain kind of outcome, we have to police and model produce the model that we want to take place, and to structure that model in such a way that its organization is a microcosm or homunculus of the thing that we want to have ultimately. Platforms don't work that way. One of their strange political logics is that in many cases it's through something that in fact may be asymmetrical in this. So it's an argument about infrastructure. I don't know what the emotional relationship with infrastructure always will be, but the thing is about the way infrastructure works is it's not always about your own emotional or ethical relationship to it. It has outcomes regardless of whether you're a good person or a bad person. You turn the faucet and the water comes on regardless of your own state of state of being and how it would be calibrated. I think part of this evacuation of the human diagram is probably to get past this impression that good people will be the ones doing good things. I think we want to take a little bit more instrumental relationship to this. Anyway, there's much more to discuss with this.
I mean, nobody ever asks, you know, are you for or against the sky, Ben? Are you for or against water? Are you for or against gravity? Are you for or against bones? Like, no one asks that. But are you for or against technology is the same question, yeah? I'm anti-bone, but no one asks these questions. Like, why is technology a special case? Like, let's not make it that. It's equivalent to asking these other questions. More like, what is gravity? What is the sky?
Right.
Yeah.
And I know that you were technological, not social constructivists or technological determinists.
Let's do neither.
But technological constructivists.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to do with the model, I think that Carla's point was, which I think is important here and ties into this. You know, there's at least three different, and Lev's discussion of the analytics here and learning is important. There's at least three different ways in which models can be put to use in this way. We have models that are, in essence, descriptive, which are here's what's going on. Here's a synthetic and reductive image of what we see happening in a certain way. There's models that are predictive, like the way in which often high-speed trading systems will work. Here's what we think is most likely going to happen, and sometimes those slide back and forth. And then we have models that are essentially normative. You know, this is what we want to have happen, with like an architectural model. Architectural models are not predictive. You don't hire an architect to say, I think this is most likely the building is going to happen.
Although that's what actually happens.
But rather than normative. And I think the question of the model is here, and I mean this, it's both an infrastructure and a schema. It's a model that hopefully can work across all three of those in different kinds of ways. And the way, to the extent to which it can slide from one to the other, it would be useful. Would be my guess.
There's a Matt.
I have an ability. Might be like this.
We'll get one more. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Ines. I'm an artist based in Oslo, and this question is, I'm a tourist here to begin with. As an artist, all that what I hear is I use as a material for my work. So, in some way, abstract that in my own way. But the question is more selfish. As directed to Benjamin, in your resume it's written that you are teaching art. So how does art contaminate your work, or how your teaching contaminates your work in the stack contaminates your teaching in the arts? And yes. And also the small correction. To actually don't trust somebody under 30. I think learning code is cool, but you also need to do some art, because that is very, very useful skill to thinking in lateral way. Absolutely.
He did both.
And MI5 did apologize for 2 weeks ago for thank to gay people for helping MI5 to be very supportive to spies. Just to refer to Turkey. But yeah, that's it.
So I'll take I guess the question on art, I'll answer more directly, or first. I think Lev's point about, I feel very lucky to be teaching art in a science and technology research university, as opposed to having taught in standalone schools beforehand, and the opportunity to do art in relationship with all of the other laboratories is something I want to go back to the other way as well. I have, to me, the most interesting and the most socially engaged art is the ones that is most focused on a kind of capacity for abstraction, not the immediate instrumentalization of the experience of the artwork to model some kind of some sort of social scenario. I think that Ray Rossier has a nice sort of riff in which he talks about the capacity for early life forms to map their surroundings as the basis of any form of abstraction. There's a cartographic abstraction, and the protozoa and so forth. Art, to me, in this sense, is close within the university, is closest to mathematics in this way. That they both have this capacity for our abilities to perform abstractions and abstractions of those abstractions according to take place. I would say one thing though, in terms of where Lev was also going before with the other sorts of books. I think there's what I would hope this would work is a different kind of shift as well. For the longest time, and Delanda's book is a good example of this, but and I love this book very much. But philosophy and design and engineering have had this relationship where the philosophers will write these books, they have this sort of catechism of concepts, and then the artists and designers will make things that look like those concepts. So we've got Derrida buildings and Deleuze buildings, and now, God forbid, we have Harvard buildings and shit like this. I think that the necessity for theory and art, which are, I think, put together, is to produce these kinds of active concepts and abstractions, is one that at this point is probably at least a few years behind where the science and engineering is. The raw material that we have to work with that are asking not just scientific questions or engineering questions about the way in which matter works and the world works and our relationships. Those are ones that we're desperately in need of new conceptual mechanisms in order to adjudicate. And just on this point, to me, one of the things that's come out of the work that I've done in collaboration with a lot of the scientists and engineers is how very clear science is a method. It's not a subject matter. Atoms and molecules and biomorphic processes are simply the world. The science is a method for identifying them and modeling them in a certain way, but they belong to all of us, and they're all things about which we would need to work. And so the kind of art and theory that I'm interested in is one that goes to that level and builds it on up. But a materialism that's based on an actual understanding of matter.
Yeah.
Would be a good place.
So without having read the book, I'm obviously super excited to get into it. I guess my kind of understanding from talking to you a bit about it before and from your talk tonight is that I know it seems like you're kind of diagramming in a way the sort of the current state of almost like the body of neoliberal capitalism in a way. I guess that's the way I sort of see this operation as a kind of a diagrammatic thing. And then, of course, the way that humans are sort of embedded in the system. And I guess, so obviously this has evolved in response to a specific set of selection pressures, right? Like, and we've talked a lot about biological systems and the selection pressures that they're evolving in response to. And this whole, global network of stack and global capital, it's evolved in response to a very specific set of incentive structures. And I wonder when we start to think about AI and start to speculate about the future of AI, is it safe to assume that these types of systems will be responding to the same types of selection pressures and the same types of incentive structures that the system that we're sort of currently mapping out and currently trying to understand is or has evolved in response? Does that make sense?
I'll just answer it quickly, just
conceptual outbreak.
In the book, I deal with the genealogy of this planetary computation that tries to make an argument that while it's clearly operating in relation to there's nothing intrinsic about that coupling in that relationship any more than there's an intrinsic relationship between information theory and finance or thermodynamics and laws, and that even the historicity of algorithmic governance in and of itself is operated. At least both sides of the Cold War divided. I also want to just make sure that Matt's asking this question is a good example of the kind of work that I'm talking about, who did a degree with me at SCIAR some time ago and then decided to go do a PhD in entomology, like not words, ants, at Princeton. So he's, so more people should go do that.
Yes.
So, but you're saying that this entity could have evolved according to any number of
It's at least 3 layers.
any number of selection pressures that could have generated in a kind of a convergence.
And it did, and hopefully it should. Yes, I don't think it's intrinsically important to this system. I'll refer you to the page numbers.
Do we we'll do one more and then we'll wrap up.
So this is my friend Adam.
Yeah, I saw Adam over there.
Sorry. First of all, I wanted to say it's great to see your mind squeezed out on all these pages. It's fabulous. I recognize. And I wanted to comment also on whether it's design or art, the slideshow, because I remember like working together at undergrad, just seeing your artwork and being like, it's still going. It's great. I wanted to talk a little bit about non-human or AI uncanny in terms of our viscerality. I just wanted to ask, like I sense in your writings, the dispute plan writings, this Ballardy and Matteo, you know about Ballard, we know about Ballard. It's this thrill of like a wasteland of disparate things, not an order of things, but a strewness. After the things are out of control, there's some joy in looking back at the end of human exceptionalism, but it's also a mess without us, and it's pleasant. But what does it mean, the irony of non-human retro from an AI standpoint, from a non-human standpoint? So, in other words, like, what is the corpuscular? What is like that corpus after it's gone to some extent, or reincarnated? This is a strange thing to say, but we know. I saw a lot of cellophane on cellophane, like plastic sushi covered in plastic wrap in your images. And I think that computer learning might not find that as funny as we do, but it might have its own irony. And its irony might have to do with a non-visceral phobia that we're trying to contradict, but coming from a completely different angle. So I'm kind of interested in the future of irony or machine uncanny.
Maybe we end with that. I think we read the Ballard in a similar way. That in this horror, there's also something like of this end of the world. It's not a catastrophism. It's not a now we've gotten our revenge. The end of the world has finally come, and we're still standing. It's not like a millenarian eschatology. It's more of a sort of secular numinous that something has yet emerged, and yet you were there to sort of see this and going forth, and birth of something in this way. I like the idea of AI retro, of the ways in which forms of intelligence would have their own kind of revivalism or something. Remember Deep Dream? That was great, right? 100 years from now, get little AI teenagers going through, bringing back Deep Dream and confusing their parents with
and wondering what Watson was.
Yeah, and it forms in the longer version of this piece on Deep Dream, I like to talk about what James Bridle's the new aesthetic, and it's like a kind of machine vision connoisseurship, like that it would begin to make more discriminatory distinctions between what it's looking at and begin to make its own sort of set category choices that Lev was beginning to go through that are motivated not only by the skeuomorphic residue of the original programmers, but have it on their own sort of emergent properties. Would we be able to make sense of them? How would we see them? Are those forms of connoisseurship available to us to participate in the same way that those Ballardian protagonists get to participate in these eruptions? And that's a good question. Yeah.
Okay.
So people should buy the book, right? Yeah. Both of them. Both.
Go buy books.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.